After my wife passed, it was just me and my 5-year-old daughter, Lily. We moved into a smaller home in a quieter neighborhood to start over. Everything was fine for the first few weeks, peaceful even. Lily adjusted quickly, made drawings, ran around in the backyard, laughed like she hadn't in months. Then the behavior started. She began talking to someone who wasn't there. Not unusual for kids, but it was more than that. She'd set the table for 3, whisper to the corners of her room, and get upset if I interrupted. I asked her about it, and she only said, "She doesn't like when you watch." One night, I was woken up by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. At first, I thought Lily was up for water or had a nightmare, but the steps were slow, heavy, too heavy. I opened my door and saw nothing, but Lily's door was cracked open. She was sitting on the floor, eyes wide, pointing at the closet. The next day, I installed a baby monitor, not for her, but for my peace of mind. That night, I watched the feed from my room. Around 2:14 a.m., the screen glitched. Then I saw Lily sitting up in bed, looking at the closet. The door opened on its own, and a shadow stepped out. Not a person, just a silhouette, like a void moving through the room. It stood at the edge of her bed, watching, not moving. Then Lily slowly laid back down as if nothing was wrong. The shadow leaned over her, and the feed cut to static. When I ran to her room, she was asleep, peaceful, closet closed. Nothing out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had been there, something. From then on, Lily's drawings changed. No more sunshine or flowers, just black shapes, stick figures with hollow eyes. She drew one of me, one of her, and one more labeled the mother. I had the house checked. Electrical, gas, carbon monoxide, nothing unusual. But every night, the monitor would flicker and the shadow would return. Sometimes it would stand in the hallway. Sometimes I'd wake up to find the monitor moved to face my bed. I finally took Lily to a child psychologist. During the session, the doctor called me in with a strange look on her face. She showed me a picture Lily had drawn that day. It showed our living room, but with a woman standing behind me. Dressed like my wife. Same eyes, same hair, but wrong. The psychologist gently asked Lily who that was. She said, "That's the one who tucks me in now. Not Daddy." I moved us out of that house within the week. I left furniture, toys, even clothes behind. I don't know what was in that house. I don't know if it followed us or if it stayed behind. But sometimes when Lily's asleep, I see her door open just a crack, and I hear breathing that isn't hers. A couple of years ago, I matched with someone on a dating app. She had a warm smile, a bit of a vintage vibe, and we seemed to click instantly. Her name was Leela, and after chatting for a week, we made plans to meet up for coffee. We met at a quiet little cafe downtown. She was exactly as she looked in her photos, charming, polite, a little quiet, but in a way that made you want to know more. We talked for over an hour, mostly about books, music, and weird local legends. I remember her asking if I believed in ghosts. After coffee, she asked if I wanted to take a walk. The evening was cool, and the streets were nearly empty. We strolled for a while before she asked if I'd like to come back to her place. It felt fast, but I agreed. She lived just a few blocks away. Her apartment was old, high ceilings, antique furniture, thick velvet curtains that blocked out all the city noise. It didn't match her youthful vibe, but she explained it was her grandmother's place and she'd inherited it. I didn't question it. We sat on the couch, talked a bit more, and then nothing. The next thing I remember is waking up in complete darkness. Not her apartment, not the couch, just pitch blackness. I felt cold stone beneath me, and the air was damp. When my eyes adjusted, I saw I was in what looked like an underground room. No windows, just a single heavy wooden door. I banged on it, screamed, but no one came. Hours passed, or maybe days. I lost track of time. Eventually, the door creaked open. A man stepped in, tall, gaunt, dressed like someone from a different century. He didn't speak. He just stared. Then he stepped aside, and Lila walked in behind him. She was still smiling, still dressed like she had been on our date, but her eyes were completely black. She knelt down beside me and whispered something I couldn't understand, like another language or just gibberish. Then they left, and the door closed again. When I was finally found, I was lying in an alley downtown, filthy, weak, and confused. No one named Lila lived in that apartment. In fact, the building she supposedly lived in had been abandoned for over 20 years due to a fire. I deleted the app, changed my number, moved cities. But sometimes I still get notifications from the app, matches, messages, always from profiles with the same smile, always named Leela. I used to help people move furniture for extra cash. One of those side gigs you pick up off Craigslist when you're in between jobs and trying to make rent. Most of the time it was college kids switching apartments or elderly couples downsizing. Nothing really memorable, until the Maple Street job. It was a quiet neighborhood, older homes, lots of overgrown trees and peeling paint. The kind of street that felt stuck in another decade. The house I pulled up to looked abandoned. No car in the driveway, no porch light, windows dark, curtains closed. But someone had left a note taped to the front door with my name on it. It read, "Item in basement, back doors open, payment on the kitchen counter." That should have been my first red flag, but I figured maybe the owner was shy or sick, or just didn't want to deal with socializing. I let myself in through the back like the note said. The house smelled stale, dust and mold and something else, something metallic. The kitchen counter had a plain white envelope with $200 in crisp bills inside. The basement door groaned when I opened it. I flicked the light switch, but the bulb overhead just buzzed and flickered, barely illuminating the steps. I used my phone flashlight. That's when I saw the couch. It was an old, tattered thing, mustard yellow with wooden legs. Looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. But the weirdest part, it was facing the wall. Not just pushed near it, completely pressed against the far basement wall, like someone had intentionally positioned it that way. I walked around it, trying to figure out the best way to lift it. That's when I noticed the scratches on the floor. Deep ones, arcing away from the couch like someone had been dragged across the concrete. There were stains too, dark ones, soaked into the cement. I should have walked out right then, but I reached for the armrest, ready to shift the couch. That's when I heard it. Thump. It came from inside the couch. I froze, held my breath. Another thump, then a soft scraping sound, like nails against fabric. I backed away slowly, trying to convince myself it was just some kind of animal. A raccoon, a rat. But then the couch moved. Just an inch, like something inside it had shifted weight. I ran, didn't care about the money anymore. I flew up the stairs, slammed the basement door shut, and bolted out the back. As I turned to look through the kitchen window, I swear I saw a hand, small, pale, pressing against the basement glass. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up the address online. The house had belonged to a man named Victor Holt. He vanished in 1989. His wife claimed he went crazy, obsessed with the idea that the furniture in their house was alive. Said he heard voices coming from the basement. They never found his body. But neighbors sometimes reported strange sounds coming from the house, especially from the basement. Craigslist never listed that job. And a week later, the same envelope showed up at my door with a new address. About 2 years ago, I worked as an overnight security guard for a mid-sized office building on the outskirts of a city in Pennsylvania. It wasn't anything glamorous, mostly monitoring empty hallways through security cameras, walking a few rounds, making sure no one broke in. The building had 3 floors and a basement level used for storage and server equipment. The cameras covered almost every area except the bathrooms and parts of the basement where the signal was always weak. Still, the place had decent lighting and modern gear, so it wasn't exactly creepy at first. My shifts were uneventful for the first month. Quiet, boring, and routine. But one night, around 2:40 a.m., I noticed movement on camera 9, which overlooked the hallway on the 3rd floor. I switched to it, expecting to see the janitor. Instead, I saw a woman. She was barefoot, wearing a long white dress, standing motionless just outside one of the office doors. Her hair was long and messy, covering most of her face, and she wasn't doing anything, just standing there, arms at her sides. I thought maybe someone had snuck in, so I checked the log. No entries past 10 p.m. The building should have been empty. I radioed up to the 3rd floor and walked there cautiously, flashlight in hand. When I reached the hallway, it was completely empty. I checked every room, nothing. I even reviewed the footage again when I returned to the office. She was gone, no sign of her entering or leaving. One frame she was there, and the next she just vanished. After that night, she started showing up on different cameras, always at the same time, between 2:35 and 2:45 a.m. Sometimes she'd be standing in the stairwell, sometimes in the break room, once even at the foot of the basement stairs. But every time I went to investigate, she wasn't there. Eventually, she started getting closer to the security room. One night I saw her on camera 2, just outside the elevator leading to my floor. Then camera 1, the hallway I used to get to the office. That was the last night I worked there. When I quit, I didn't tell anyone why. A week later, I got an email from the guy who replaced me. It just said, "Did you ever see her move?" with an attached video. In the clip, the woman was standing just outside the security room door, smiling. I had been driving for over 10 hours straight, heading back home after a business trip in a small Midwestern town. The interstate stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by nothing but fields and forest. My eyes were beginning to blur, so when I saw the sign for a 24-hour motel off exit 29, I pulled off without thinking. The place looked like every tired roadside stop you've ever seen. Dim lights, a flickering vacancy sign, and a small office that smelled like coffee and air freshener. The clerk barely looked up as he handed me the key. Room 12, ground floor. I parked directly in front of the door. The room was dated but clean enough. Orange patterned carpet, 2 beds with stiff sheets and a small TV bolted to the wall. I dropped my bag, turned on the AC, and flopped down fully clothed. The hum of the fan lulled me into sleep faster than I expected. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up freezing. The AC was blasting cold air despite the thermostat being set low. I got up to adjust it, but the moment I stepped out of bed, I noticed something was off. The TV was on, showing static, and the bathroom light was flickering through the crack in the door. I was sure I'd turned everything off. I checked the door, still locked, windows shut. No sign of entry, but the weirdest thing was the carpet. I could see faint wet footprints leading from the door to the bathroom. I hadn't taken a shower. I hadn't even used the bathroom. I pushed the bathroom door open and found the sink running. The mirror was fogged up, and on the glass, a handprint, small and childlike, pressed firmly against the surface. But I was alone. I checked the closet, under the beds, everywhere. No one. I wiped the mirror, and for a split second, I swore I saw a pale face over my shoulder. When I spun around, the bathroom was empty. I chalked it up to exhaustion, turned everything off again, and got back into bed. At 4:44 a.m., I woke up gasping for breath. Someone was standing at the foot of the bed. Not moving, just watching. The figure was tall, thin, and soaking wet. Water dripped from its clothes and pooled on the carpet. But the worst part? Its head twitched like a broken puppet, sharp, jerking movements side to side. Before I could move, the lights cut out. When they came back a few seconds later, the figure was gone. But the TV screen had changed, no longer static. Just one sentence in red, "You woke me up." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At sunrise, I threw everything in my car and drove straight to the office to check out. The clerk was gone. The office was locked, and when I looked back at the motel, my room 12, had no door, no window, nothing. Just a solid brick wall where the room should have been. Growing up in rural Pennsylvania, we had a lot of land. Woods, fields, and an old tool shed that sat near the edge of the forest. My parents never used it. They said it was there when they bought the property, and they'd always felt strange around it. I thought it was just old and creepy, perfect for daring friends to go inside. When I moved back to help my father after his surgery, I ended up staying in my childhood room. One night, while going through some boxes in the attic, I found a stack of Polaroids I didn't recognize. They were all of the backyard. In every photo, that same tool shed was visible. But in several of them, there was a figure standing just outside it, tall, blurry, and dark. The timestamps were all different. Some from the 90s, some just a few years ago. I showed my mom, but she swore up and down she'd never taken them. That night, I stood at my window with binoculars and stared at the shed. Hours passed, but nothing moved. Around 3 a.m., I looked again and saw the door was open. The next morning, I went to check it out. The air got noticeably colder the closer I got. Inside, the shed was empty except for scratch marks covering every surface. Claw marks, human-sized. The floorboards were torn up, and in the corner, there was a small pile of dirt with old fingernails embedded in it. Over the next few nights, things got weirder. I'd hear knocking on the windows, always in threes. The lights would flicker when I walked past the back door. One night, the motion sensor in the backyard activated, and I saw a tall shape standing at the edge of the trees, watching. I installed cameras. Nothing ever showed up on the footage, but every morning the files were corrupted, like something had overwritten them. Eventually, I decided to stay up all night with a flashlight and my phone. At 2:12 a.m., the back door creaked open, even though it was locked. I stepped into the yard, shaking, and aimed the flashlight at the shed. The door was wide open, and this time, I heard something breathing inside. I ran toward it, stupid, I know, and I reached the doorway. The flashlight flickered. For 1 second, I saw it. A man crouched in the far corner, skin gray, mouth stretched into a gaping grin. No eyes, just deep black holes where they should have been. I slammed the door and ran back to the house. When I looked back from the porch, the shed was closed. No sound, no movement. But there were fresh, muddy footprints leading up to my door. I boarded the shed the next day, hammered every inch shut. Weeks passed, no incidents. Then one morning, I found a note taped to the inside of my bedroom window. That wasn't your shed to close. A few years ago, I moved into a small basement apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Oregon. It was cheap, close to work, and the landlord didn't ask many questions. The place was old, but not in a charming way. It smelled like dust and wood rot, and the floorboards creaked like they were trying to say something. Still, I was on a budget, and it was home for a while. The apartment had a crawl space in the back, just past the laundry area. It had a wooden hatch that didn't lock. I avoided it. I figured it was just where old pipes ran, or where the original owners dumped junk. But every so often, I'd hear faint shuffling noises from inside. I told myself it was rats or maybe raccoons. One day, out of curiosity, I left my phone recording overnight near the crawl space. I thought maybe I'd catch the sound and send it to the landlord to get pest control involved. When I checked the audio the next morning, I expected squeaking, maybe scratching. But what I heard made my skin crawl. Around 2:40 a.m., the recording picked up a soft click, like the hatch slowly opening. Then the sound of something crawling, something heavy, dragging across the concrete. A low, rhythmic breathing followed. And then faintly, whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like it was reciting names. One of them was mine. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, lights on, holding a kitchen knife like it would make a difference. Nothing else happened. The next day, I bought a motion-activated camera and aimed it at the crawl space. That night, around the same time, 2:40 a.m., the camera triggered. I watched the footage the next morning, half not wanting to see what it captured. At 2:41, the hatch opened, slowly, and a pale, thin hand reached out. The fingers were too long, the nails broken and yellow. Then a head emerged, bald, sunken eyes, mouth slightly open. It just stared at the camera, not blinking, not moving, just watching. After about 5 minutes, it crawled back inside and shut the hatch. I showed the footage to the landlord. He just stared at the screen for a while, then said, "I thought we sealed that place years ago." When I pressed him, he told me the previous tenant vanished. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. The only clue was a strange trail of dirt leading to the crawl space. I moved out the next day. But sometimes I still hear the breathing, late at night when everything is silent. And I always wake up at 2:40 a.m. Because deep down, I think, it found a way out. A couple years ago, I booked a remote cabin on Red Lake in northern Minnesota for a solo retreat. I had just gotten out of a rough patch in life, and the idea of disconnecting from everything sounded like the perfect escape. The listing promised peace, seclusion, and no neighbors for miles. That was exactly what I wanted. The cabin was beautiful. Rustic, creaky floorboards, antlers mounted above the fireplace, and a wraparound porch facing the lake. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just nature and silence. The first couple days were everything I'd hoped for: long walks, journaling, and sitting out under the stars. At night, the woods felt alive. I chalked it up to deer and raccoons. I didn't let my imagination get the better of me. On the third night, I noticed something strange. My boots, which I left outside the front door, were gone. I figured an animal dragged them off, but when I found them an hour later, they were sitting neatly by the back door, clean, untouched by mud or leaves. That unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. That same night, I heard footsteps on the porch. Not animal rustling, these were slow, deliberate steps. I stayed frozen in bed, listening to them move across the wooden boards. They circled the cabin 3 times, then stopped. I didn't sleep a minute after that. The next morning, I checked the security camera I brought with me. It was motion activated and set to record anything moving near the porch. At 3:12 a.m., the feed showed the camera lens fog up, then a flicker, like static, nothing else. As if something had stood directly in front of it, but never triggered the motion sensor. I should have left. I should have packed my bags and driven the 5 hours back to civilization. But I convinced myself I was just on edge. Maybe I was more stressed than I realized. That night, I barricaded the front door and windows. I even kept a fire poker beside the bed. At exactly 3:12 a.m. again, I heard whispering. Faint, like it was carried on the wind. But there was no wind. Just that same low, rhythmic sound circling the cabin. I held my breath and stayed still. The whispering stopped abruptly. Then came a single knock at the front door. Just one. It echoed through the entire cabin. I waited. No other sound came. Morning took forever to arrive. When it did, I found muddy handprints on every window. Dozens of them. Too large to be from a child, too small for an adult. All pressed flat against the glass, like whatever made them had been peering in. That was the final straw. I loaded my truck and left before noon. I didn't even bother cleaning up. I checked the security camera again before I left. This time it had captured something. At 3:12 a.m., the footage showed a silhouette standing at the edge of the tree line. Just standing, then walking. Not toward the cabin, but around it, over and over. On the fourth loop, it stopped and stared directly into the lens. The face was obscured by long matted hair, and its arms hung unnaturally low. It raised one hand and tapped the lens. The knock I heard. I never went back to Red Lake, but sometimes when I'm up late at night, I hear whispering outside my apartment window. I live on the 5th floor. I started dating Leah in the fall of last year. We met through mutual friends, and things moved quickly between us. She was funny, smart, and had this warm energy that made it easy to be around her. But within weeks, I started to notice little things, small enough to dismiss at first, but too strange to ignore later. It began with her apartment. The first time I visited, something felt off. Her place was immaculately clean, but nothing seemed lived in. No dishes in the sink, no clothes anywhere, not even in the hamper. I didn't see any photos of friends or family, just stock art on the walls and a few random books that looked untouched. I asked her once if she lived alone. She just nodded and changed the subject. One night while she was asleep beside me, I got up to grab a glass of water. As I passed her bathroom, the light flicked on by itself. Inside, the mirror was fogged up like someone had just taken a shower, except we hadn't. I stepped in and wiped the glass, and for a second, I swear I saw Leah's reflection behind me, staring at me with a blank face, only she was still asleep in bed. Things escalated from there. She started texting me strange things at odd hours, fragments of sentences, sometimes in all caps, sometimes in languages I couldn't recognize. I'd ask her about them the next day, and she'd act like she had no idea what I was talking about. At first, I thought it might be sleep texting, but the messages felt deliberate, almost like warnings. One morning I woke up in her bed alone. She wasn't home. I checked the time. It was 4:06 a.m. I heard movement from the living room, so I got up to look. The apartment was empty, but the TV was on, playing static. In front of it sat a VHS tape, one I hadn't seen before. No label, just a piece of masking tape that said "Play Me." I don't know why I did, but I played it. The screen showed grainy footage of Leah, staring directly into the camera. She didn't blink, she didn't move. She just stared for 10 full minutes, and then without moving her mouth, I heard her voice through the speakers. It said my name, then whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." I turned around. Leah was standing right behind me, only it wasn't Leah. Her skin looked thinner, like it was stretched too tightly over her skull. Her eyes were completely black, and her smile looked too wide, like it didn't belong on a human face. I blinked, and she was gone. I left the apartment and never went back. She tried to contact me after that, emails, texts, voicemails, but I never responded. Her number eventually stopped working. I even tried to find her through friends, but none of them remembered who she was. One even told me they had never introduced me to anyone named Leah. Sometimes I dream about her. In the dream, she's always sitting in front of a TV, watching static. And when I get close, she turns her head slowly, and her mouth begins to open wider than any human mouth should. I moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood last summer. It was the kind of place where every lawn is trimmed. Everyone waves when you drive by, and the worst crime on record was a stolen Amazon package. For the first few months, things were peaceful. That changed when I started noticing the house across the street. It was always dark. The blinds were never open, the porch light never came on. At first, I figured someone just lived a private life, but I never saw anyone go in or out. No deliveries, no visitors, no trash cans rolled out on pickup day. Just silence. Then I noticed the lights. Around 2 a.m. every night, a single light would flicker on in the upstairs window, just for a few seconds, like someone was pacing back and forth with a candle. The first few times, I chalked it up to bad wiring or a faulty bulb. But it kept happening, same time, same window. One night, I decided to take a closer look. I walked across the street and stood just outside the property. The house was even stranger up close. The windows looked dirty from the inside. There was dust on the mail slot, cobwebs everywhere, and yet, the lawn was freshly cut. I stepped onto the porch and was hit with a sudden chill, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees. I knocked, no answer. Just as I turned to leave, I heard it, a loud thud from upstairs, followed by what sounded like dragging. I ran home. The next morning, I tried to forget about it. But when I opened my blinds, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The upstairs window of the house across the street was open, and hanging from it, just slightly, was a white curtain. Only, I knew for a fact there hadn't been any curtains the night before. More unsettling? In the dust on the glass, someone had drawn a large, perfect circle, and inside it, a smiley face. I decided to check county records for the property. The listing said it had been vacant for over 8 years. No one had lived there since the last owners. A couple with a young son vanished without a trace. I tried reporting the strange activity, but the cops laughed it off. Said teenagers sometimes mess around in abandoned places, but I knew better. Every night since then, the light still flicks on at 2 a.m. And now there's a new detail. In the morning, I keep finding footprints on my lawn, muddy, barefoot prints that start in front of my house and lead back to the one across the street. Sometimes, when I look out at night, I see the curtain move. And once, just once, I saw a pale hand slide the window shut. A couple of years ago, I took a weekend off to go camping by myself. I wanted to unplug, just me, my tent, and a stretch of forest I'd never been to before. It was one of those state parks that didn't get much foot traffic, which was exactly what I needed after a week of staring at screens. I did some light research, saw they had a handful of primitive campsites, and figured I'd pick one at random. When I arrived, the park seemed off. The usual ranger station was empty, but there was a clipboard and a map on the counter showing which campsites were open. I picked site number 7, near the creek, and jotted my name down like they asked. The road leading into the woods was narrow and rough, with branches scraping the side of my car. The sun was starting to dip, so I quickly set up my tent, gathered some wood, and started a small fire. That first night was quiet, too quiet, no crickets, no owls. Just the sound of the wind pushing through the trees and something faint like whispering, but never close enough to hear clearly. I chalked it up to my imagination and went to bed early. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up freezing. The fire had died down, but that wasn't what got my attention. I realized there were fresh footprints around my tent, bare feet. I hadn't heard anyone approach, and they weren't mine. They circled once, paused at the entrance, and then disappeared back into the woods. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I packed up early and went to the ranger station to report what I saw. But when I got there, the place was completely abandoned. No clipboard, no map, just dust and dead bugs lining the windowsills. The wooden sign out front was so faded you could barely read it. The only legible part said, "Closed for restoration since 2009. The worst part? When I got home and looked up the park's name online, there was no record of it, not in state databases, not in camping forums, not even on old map archives. It was like the whole place never existed. And when I checked the photos I took, every picture was black. Except for one, the one I didn't remember taking. It showed me asleep by the fire, with 2 figures standing in the tree line. It was around 11 p.m. when I decided to hit the local grocery store. I'd been putting off shopping for days and figured it'd be quick with no one around. The place was only a few blocks away and usually empty at night. Fluorescent lights, stale music, and that weird sterile smell you only get in places open 24 hours. When I got there, the parking lot had just one car, an old Buick with fogged up windows. I didn't think much of it. I went in, grabbed the cart, and started moving through the aisles. It was the usual routine: milk, bread, snacks, some frozen meals. Everything felt normal at first, but somewhere around aisle 5, things got weird. It felt like the store grew. I don't mean in a metaphorical sense, I mean the aisles got longer, like impossibly long. I walked from one end to the other, and when I looked back, it was like the entrance was half a football field away. The lights buzzed louder too, and I swear the ceiling seemed higher than when I entered. That's when I started noticing the mannequins. Not actual ones, but people standing too still. One was in produce, staring at apples with his head tilted. Another was halfway down the snack aisle, her face obscured by long hair. I tried to brush it off as other shoppers, but something was off. They never moved, never blinked, and they were all facing me, no matter where I turned. I dropped what I was holding and made my way to the register. No one was at the counter. Not even the self-checkouts were working. The screens just blinked "error" in red text. As I headed for the exit, I passed the security monitors. Every one of them was on a different aisle, and every screen showed me standing still, staring back. When I finally made it outside, the Buick was gone. But in its place was a grocery cart, filled with every item I'd picked up. Plus one thing I hadn't: a Polaroid photo of me standing in the frozen food section, eyes blacked out with marker. I drove home in silence. When I unpacked my groceries, I found one extra receipt in the bag. The only item listed was "you were seen," and I haven't gone back since. I never had a history of sleepwalking, no childhood stories, no weird family anecdotes. So when it started last year, it completely caught me off guard. It began with small things: waking up with the fridge open, lights turned on, or items moved around. At first, I thought I was just groggy and forgetting I'd done them. But then I started waking up in different rooms. Once, I found myself standing in the hallway facing the front door. Another time, I was on the back porch with bare feet, shivering in the dark. I started keeping a sleep journal and installed a motion-activated camera in my bedroom, hoping to figure out what was happening. That night, I went to bed a little nervous. I locked all the doors, closed the windows, and placed my phone on the dresser to track my movement. I even left the light on in the hallway. The next morning, the phone was in the kitchen sink. The front door was unlocked. I checked the footage immediately. What I saw still makes my skin crawl. Around 2:42 a.m., I sat up in bed. I didn't get out right away. I just sat there, staring at the wall for almost 10 minutes. Then I stood, turned toward the camera, and smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, like something was pushing my face from the inside. I left the room, and the camera caught nothing else. But when I checked my backyard camera, things got worse. I was outside, in my sleep, just standing under the tree near the fence. I stayed there, motionless, for over an hour. Then, at 4:05 a.m., I wasn't alone. Something else stepped into frame. A tall, thin figure, barely visible in the shadows. It stood across from me, mimicking my posture, like it was watching or waiting. The feed glitched for a second, and when it returned, I was back inside, and the figure was gone. I told myself it had to be a person. Maybe a neighbor, maybe a prank. But the next night, I didn't sleep. I sat in bed, watching the feed in real time. At exactly 2:42 a.m., I sat up. But I was fully awake. I hadn't drifted off. My body moved on its own, like something inside me had hit a switch. I tried to stop myself but couldn't. I was aware of every step as I walked outside, barefoot again, into the freezing night. And when I reached the tree, the figure was already there, waiting. This time, I saw it up close. Its face looked like mine, but wrong. like someone had tried to reconstruct my face from memory. The next morning, I installed locks on the outside of my bedroom door. I even considered sleeping elsewhere, but deep down I knew it wouldn't matter, because it doesn't need doors to get in. It just needs me to fall asleep. A few months ago, I left my house to grab groceries. It was nothing out of the ordinary, just a quick trip while my phone was charging in the living room. I live in a small neighborhood on the edge of town, pretty quiet most of the time. It was daylight, clear skies, people walking their dogs. Nothing seemed unusual. I was gone for about 40 minutes. When I got home, I noticed the porch light was on. That might not sound strange, but I always leave it off during the day. I chalked it up to maybe accidentally flipping the switch earlier. But when I stepped inside, something felt wrong. The air was different, like someone had been in there. My phone was no longer on the couch where I left it. It was face down on the kitchen counter. The screen was cracked. That stopped me cold. I never used the kitchen counter for electronics. At first, I thought I'd been robbed, but nothing was missing. Not my laptop, not my wallet. Even the cash I kept in the drawer was untouched. Just a few things moved, out of place, like someone had gone through them but didn't care about taking anything. I checked the back door, locked. Windows, also locked. It didn't make sense. But the worst part came when I checked my phone. There were 6 new photos in the camera roll, all taken between 12:10 and 12:35 p.m. while I was gone. They were photos of my hallway, my bedroom, the living room, all blurry and slightly tilted, like someone had taken them in a hurry. The last photo made my stomach drop. It was a close-up of my bed pillows, like the camera had been resting there. I didn't see anyone in the pictures, but I could feel someone's presence behind the lens. The angles were wrong. Whoever took them had studied the house. I went to the neighbors, asked if they'd seen anything. One of them, an older guy across the street, said he saw someone come out of my house while I was gone. He assumed it was a friend since I had just left minutes before. According to him, the person looked like me. That night, I changed the locks. I installed a security system, cameras, motion lights, the whole deal. But even now, months later, I still can't shake the feeling that someone had been waiting for me to leave. Not to rob me, not to hurt me. Just to explore, to look, to watch me live. And the scariest part is, if I hadn't checked those photos, I would have never known someone was inside. Not because they didn't leave evidence, but because they didn't need to. A few years ago, my 2 college friends and I decided to take a spontaneous road trip across the country. No real itinerary, just a map, some snacks, and our beat-up SUV. It was meant to be one of those memory-making adventures, the kind you talk about for the rest of your life. And it was, but not in the way any of us hoped. Things started off great. We drove through wide-open highways, slept in sketchy motels, and hit a bunch of roadside attractions. But somewhere in Arizona, the GPS started acting weird. It rerouted us off the interstate and down this 2-lane back road that twisted through a massive stretch of desert. We didn't think much of it at first. The scenery was cool and it felt like a shortcut. But as the sun started to set, the road just kept going. No towns, no signs, no cell service. Just desert on all sides. Eventually, we saw this old gas station up ahead. It looked abandoned, but the lights were flickering inside. We pulled over hoping to find someone who could give directions or at least let us use a phone. When we went inside, it was like stepping into the 1950s. Everything was faded, covered in dust, but there was a faint humming sound, like electricity still powered some of it. There was a man behind the counter, tall, pale, with this completely blank expression. He didn't say anything, just stared at us while we looked around. I asked if we could use the restroom, and he slowly raised one arm and pointed to the back. When I came out, My friends were gone. Not just out of sight, gone. Their stuff was still in the SUV, but the man was still behind the counter unmoving. I asked where they went. No response. Just that stare. I sprinted outside, but the landscape had changed. The road was gone. The SUV was still there, but now it was covered in a fine layer of dust, like it had been sitting there for weeks. I turned back to the gas station, but the lights were out. I opened the door, completely empty inside. Shelves bare, counter gone, just cracked tiles and darkness. I spent the night in the SUV, clutching a tire iron, too scared to sleep. By morning, a ranger found me wandering along the road, dehydrated and confused. He said the place I described hadn't existed in decades. My friends were never found. Their families filed missing persons reports, and I was cleared after extensive questioning, but nothing ever came of it. Sometimes I still get dreams of that gas station. In them, I'm back inside, and the man is pointing again. Only this time he's smiling. It was one of those nights where the rain fell like it had something to prove. I was driving home from a family event, taking back roads to avoid traffic on the highway. The rain came down harder with every mile, and soon enough, visibility dropped to almost nothing. The wipers couldn't keep up, and all I could see were blurry trees and the occasional road sign whipping past. At one point, I realized I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. My GPS was glitching, stuck on a loading screen, and cell service was gone. I passed a sign that looked handwritten. Wooden, crooked, and soaked through. I couldn't read it, but something about it made my stomach turn. About 10 minutes later, I saw headlights behind me. They came fast, almost too fast for this kind of weather. Then they disappeared. Just gone. No turnoff. No brakes. I figured it was a hallucination or maybe fatigue kicking in. But then the same lights reappeared in front of me, not behind. They blinked on like someone had just thrown a switch. I slammed the brakes and skidded sideways into the shoulder. When I looked again, there were no lights, no other car. Nothing but the pounding rain and my own heart racing in my ears. That's when I noticed the raindrops on the windshield had started forming patterns. Not random streaks, shapes, symbols. They reminded me of runes or carvings I'd seen in some old folklore books. I leaned in, staring closely, and for a split second, I saw a reflection that wasn't mine. A face in the driver's side window, pale, expressionless, looking straight at me. I floored it. The road twisted, narrowed, and then opened to an old bridge that creaked as my tires hit it. The kind of bridge that looks like it shouldn't still be standing. On the other side, I saw what looked like a figure standing in the middle of the road. No umbrella, no movement. Just standing in the storm. I swerved off the path, nearly crashing into a tree. When I got out of the car to check the damage, the figure was gone. But now, there were wet footprints leading from the middle of the road to where I stood. No sign of anyone, but the footprints were fresh. I got back in the car and sped away. Eventually, after what felt like hours, the rain let up and my GPS snapped back to life. Somehow I had looped around and was only 15 minutes from home. The next day, I looked up the road I had taken. That old bridge? Washed away in a flood 10 years ago. Closed permanently. According to every map, it shouldn't even exist anymore. But I remember every creak of the wood. And I still have those symbols sketched in the condensation on my windshield, no matter how many times I wipe it. It happened about 2 years ago, during the few months I worked the night shift at a 24-hour Walmart. I was in between jobs, and the pay was decent, so I didn't mind stocking shelves while the rest of the world slept. Most nights were uneventful, quiet, repetitive, and kind of peaceful. But there was one shift I'll never forget. And to this day, I still can't explain what happened. I was assigned to the home goods aisle, which was near the back of the store and right next to the stockroom entrance. Around 2 a.m., I went into the stockroom to grab another cart of boxes. The motion sensor lights flickered on slowly, one row at a time, casting those long shadows that made everything look a little more unsettling than it needed to be. The place was a maze of pallets and shelves. Huge metal racks stretched to the ceiling, and sometimes you'd hear things creak or shift from above, nothing out of the ordinary. That night, I wheeled a cart past the seasonal item section when I thought I heard footsteps behind me. Light, fast steps. Like someone barefoot. I paused and turned around. Nothing. I kept moving. The steps came again. But every time I stopped to look, it was dead silent. No movement. I even called out once, assuming it was another worker messing around. But no response. I chalked it up to being tired and pressed on. Eventually, I reached the back corner of the stockroom, an area we rarely used since it stored old clearance items and broken returns. I noticed something strange, a door I'd never seen before. It was small, metal, and partially open. No handle, just a narrow gap and complete darkness inside. I figured maybe it was some kind of utility room. But curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled it open all the way. Inside was pitch black with a faint smell, damp like wet cardboard and rotting wood. I stepped in, just a foot or two, when I heard something. Not footsteps this time, but breathing. Not mine. It was slow, heavy, and coming from somewhere deeper inside. I froze, the sound stopped, then something moved fast. Like someone crawling at full speed across the floor. I slammed the door shut and backed away, nearly tripping over the cart. As I ran back toward the main area, I passed by one of the metal shelves. A face was staring at me from behind the boxes. Pale, wide eyes, no expression. It didn't flinch when I made eye contact, just kept staring as I ran. I reported it to a supervisor. We searched the whole stockroom together. No door, not even a wall where I said I saw it. Just rows of inventory and forklifts. I even showed him the corner it should have been in. Nothing, but I know what I saw. That wasn't the end of it though. Over the next few nights, I'd find things out of place. Boxes moved. Lights flickering in areas where no one had been. The final straw came when I reviewed some overnight footage with a manager after we noticed some merchandise had been going missing. There was a frame, just one, where something crawled across the aisle. Low to the ground fast with limbs that didn't move like a person's should. It was gone the next frame. The manager deleted it before anyone else could see. Said it must have been a glitch, but I saw his face. He knew it wasn't. I quit a week later. I don't shop at that Walmart anymore. Back in high school, there was a classroom everyone talked about, but no one used anymore. Room B13. It was at the far end of the basement level, past the old gym and behind a locked door. It hadn't been in use for years. Some said it was for storage, others claimed something happened there. Something bad, but nobody really knew. It just sat there, untouched and avoided. During my senior year, I got involved with Yearbook Club. Part of our job was gathering photos of forgotten parts of the school for a then and now section. My friend and I were assigned the basement level. That's how I ended up standing outside B13, holding a camera, with the key we borrowed from a janitor who didn't ask any questions. The hallway itself was already creepy. Dim lights, chipped tiles, that musty smell of old mop water and forgotten textbooks. When we unlocked the door to B13, something immediately felt wrong. The air was colder. Heavy. Dust particles floated like snowflakes, disturbed only by the light from our phones. Inside, the room was surprisingly clean. Desks arranged in rows, a chalkboard still filled with faint scribbles. It looked like a class had just left, except the layer of dust told a different story. I snapped a few photos, including one of the teacher's desk. That's when my phone froze, completely unresponsive. My friend's flashlight flickered. then turned off. We stood in pitch black for a few seconds before her light came back on. When it did, the desks had moved. Not by much, but enough to notice. A few inches here and there, just wrong enough. We didn't hear them move, no sound, just suddenly different. We left fast, locked the door, went straight to the library to upload the photos. That's when we noticed something even worse. In one of the pictures taken near the back of the room, there was a figure, barely visible, standing near the last row of desks. No face, just a silhouette, and it wasn't either of us. We showed it to the yearbook advisor. She went pale and told us not to include it. Later that week, I asked the janitor about B13. He looked around before answering. Said there was a student years ago. Went missing during detention. That room was the last place anyone saw him. The school shut it down after that. Claimed it was structurally unsafe. But the janitor said something else. That room locks itself sometimes. I didn't believe him. Until the next month, when the same friend who came with me to B13 stayed late for tutoring and took a wrong turn in the basement. She texted me, panicked, said she saw the door to B13 wide open. Inside, the lights were on. Desks arranged, chalkboard clean. I told her to get out. The next day, the door was locked again, lights off. Just like before. She doesn't talk about it anymore. None of us do. But that photo is still on my hard drive. And every now and then, when I look closely, the figure in the back seems closer than I remember. A couple years ago, I went through a rough patch financially. I was working part-time, bills were stacking up, and I was desperate for something, anything that could bring in extra income. A friend of mine suggested OnlyFans. She had been doing well with it and swore it wasn't as sketchy as people thought. I wasn't sure at first, but after some hesitation, I created an anonymous account. I never showed my face, kept my identity private, and operated under a fake name. It started slow, a few subscribers here and there. But eventually, I got into a rhythm and the money started coming in. Most people were respectful. Some were a little odd, but nothing I couldn't handle. Until one subscriber messaged me with a username I'd never seen before. No profile picture, no bio, just the name Watcher37. Their messages were strange from the start. They never requested anything explicit. Instead, they'd comment on things they shouldn't know, like the color of the curtains in my room, or how I styled my hair on a day I didn't post. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe I slipped up and revealed too much in a video or photo. Then the comments got more specific. He mentioned the type of cereal I was eating in a bowl that was never shown in any post. He described the way my mailbox creaked when it was opened. I hadn't even filmed anything near my mailbox. That's when it clicked. This wasn't someone who knew me through the internet. This was someone watching me in real life. I immediately locked down my privacy settings and deleted the account. I even stopped posting online completely. But the messages didn't stop. He somehow found my personal email, then my phone number. I started receiving texts, creepy ones, vague at first. He'd send photos of my apartment building, my car, even a picture of me sitting on the couch taken through the window. I called the police, filed reports, installed security cameras, changed my number. They couldn't trace anything. He never used the same method of contact twice. One day it would be email, the next a physical letter in my mailbox. Always unsigned. Always just enough to let me know he was still watching. The worst moment came one night when I woke up to find a single Polaroid photo slipped under my bedroom door. It was a picture of me asleep. The camera angle suggested it was taken from inside my room. I checked every lock, every window. Nothing had been broken, no sign of forced entry. But somehow he had been in my home. I left the city the next day, moved across the country. Got a new job, new phone, new everything. I even changed my name legally. For months, there was nothing. It was like I had finally shaken him. until I received a package at my new address. Inside was a USB drive. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into an old laptop. There was only one file. A video, grainy and dark. It was footage of me walking to my car, entering my apartment, sleeping on the couch. It wasn't recent. These were clips from my old apartment, but they were shot from angles inside the place. Hidden cameras. To this day, I don't know how many were planted or how long they had been there. I haven't received anything else since. But I live every day wondering if he's still out there, watching, waiting. Because if he found me once, what's stopping him from doing it again?